Been hearing a lot about Marshall.
What's that?
Been hearing a lot about the Marshall 30 days to move it to either behind the front yard, because you can store an RV.
Audio is on now.
I've never read backyard. I don't know how to.
I would like to.
You saw the.
Thank you for the
I don't
heads up.
know. Classic street. Or we can do a year, so you have 30 days. From whatever date. To move it. Someplace that will leave.
And then.
You should.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. It was just-
Oh, Fred.
Oh my God, it's
Yeah,
great.
yeah, Fred. Fred is an awesome. So
Yeah.
Fred is, I was.
Oh,
amazed
thank you.
by- What was the author that you both?
Oh, good. I'm glad you got your ticket. I
Next.
got the advisor.
Yeah, he told me.
I'll
about
go.
it.
I'll deliver one
Are
on.
they already, yeah.
Cambridge, well.
Oh, they-
Yeah. Like a members congregation in church, it's near the sheriff.
I know, the boys don't want to.
This year first was.
And you're the chaperone. Nice to see you. Did you? Yeah, we're just the S's.
I think I know, recognize the name. Yeah, Fred's mentioned it before, but now that you're saying in that context. I haven't heard from- Yeah. Oh, he's a beautiful.
To order this March 28th, 2024 meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission at 5:01 PM at the Rockbridge County Administrative Offices. We have all in attendance save Gladys Hopkins. Next order of business is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any questions, concerns, additions?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Have we a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's unanimous.
Yeah, she's
Did you go-
feeling well.
Oh, okay. I was like, she disappeared. Okay, good. All right. Well, not good, but next order of business is the approval of the minutes from the February 22nd meeting 2024. High quality as always. And is there
Mhm.
anything that needs to be added, corrected, clarified?
I find the meetings more than acceptable as usual and move to approve them.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. No further comment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Carries unanimously. Next item, number 4, citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. And we will close this portion as quickly as we opened it and move on to new business. We have 3 orders of new business this evening, actually 4. And as the first 2, A and B, pertain to applications by Washington Lee University, the first being the entrance card or certificate of appropriateness 2024-03 and the site plan 2023-03. I think we'll probably have some recusals. So would anyone like to start off the list?
Yeah, I'm gonna recuse.
Okay.
Want to read the statement?
You wanna-
Yeah, you want me to? Yeah, so I'll read the conflict disclosure into the record.
Yes.
So, in accordance with Virginia Code 2.2-3112A and 3115F, I declare that I have a personal interest in the City of Lexington Planning Commission's consideration of Washington Lee University's site plan and design review application for the Lindley Center for Student Wellness, one that disqualifies me from participating in the transaction. My personal interest relates to my employment with Washington Lee University, 204 West Washington Street in Lexington. The transaction at issue relates to the real estate located on tax map number NM19. I'm advised that my personal interest requires my disqualification because the transaction has application solely to the business or property in which I have a personal interest.
Okay.
I have a personal interest too, because my husband works at Washington Lee.
Okay, and I have a conflict of interest, personal interest as well, because my wife works at Washington and Lee, and that is enough to cause recusal. So at this point, the three of us will step off the dais. I will hand over the chairing duties to our Vice Chair Shannon Spencer, and we'll go sit over there.
You might want to give her the call. No, she'll come to the gavel.
Okay, moving on to number 5, new business ECCOA 2024-03. An application by Hugh Latimer of Washington Lee University for a certificate of appropriateness for construction of the Lindley Center for Student Wellness at 200 East Denny Circle on a portion of the 103-acre parcel tax map NM19 owned by Washington and Lee University. And do you have a staff report for us?
Certainly, and I'll also ask if you would like to at the same time open up the site plan public hearing. They can be held together if you like. Most of the questions, or you don't have to, we can certainly do them individually if you prefer.
I think I'm happy to have them open at the same time. Is there anything that I need to
No.
say other than we're opening them both at the same time?
Correct. We are now
Okay.
both going to discuss the ECCOA 2024-03 and site plan 2023-03.
Yep.
Starting out quickly for the staff report for entrance corridor, just to sort of make you aware where we are in the approval process. Conditional use permit has already been approved for the use for this property, which is the Lindley Health Center and which Student Health and Wellness Center. The next steps that we're discussing this evening are the design review and the site plan. Those are all in anticipation of the building permit. Then after that, we're all in happily ever after land, hopefully, with the property or with this building in use. So first of all, with the entrance corridor, our institutional district is written in such a way that doesn't make a lot of intuitive sense that we're dealing with an entrance corridor design review when we're talking about something that is central to a site that is central to the WNL campus. But in our section 7 or article 7 with institutional use, the last one, 420-7.9 design review is required. It says design review is required for all facilities in accordance with the requirements of Article 6 of this chapter. Article 6 happens to be the entrance corridor. So I think it was just a mechanism to grab standards that we already had in another part of the zoning ordinance and utilize those for the design review for anything in an institutional district. What you see in starting on page 2, applicable entrance corridor regulations, and you're familiar with these from the multiple entrance corridor applications you have seen before. Landscaping, signage, architecture, site planning, and lighting. I'm not going to go through all of those. I'll just say that in staff's opinion, the proposed Lindley Center for Student Wellness meets all the design standards included in the entrance corridor overlay district. The proposed landscaping is consistent with the remainder of the WNL campus. The proposed signage is minimal, and the architectural details are generally consistent with other buildings on the WNL campus. Also acknowledge that the entrance corridor standards were developed for a highly traveled corridor and entrances into the city. And this site is almost the complete opposite to that. It's internal to the campus. Only the folks that we'll see will only be folks that are traveling through campus. And for those reasons, you have latitude. I'm not saying that you need latitude, that the building is not particularly attractive. I'm just saying that because of the conditions that we have, you do have discretion and latitude in applying the entrance corridor standards. We do have a suggested motion there. Included in this part of the packet on page 13 is a description of the exterior materials for your review and 2 elevations. And that's all I have for the entrance corridor portion. Happy to answer any questions there before moving on to the site plan.
John, are you sure?
No.
Nope. No questions.
Okay, site plan is a slightly different process in the sense that it is ministerial. We have now gone beyond discretion. In other words, if it meets the standards that we have in the city.
Can you tell us what page that description? Sorry.
I'm now jumped over to page 16.
116?
Okay. Ah, okay.
For site plan.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And that's 16 in the overall packet.
Thank you.
So for site plans, they are a ministerial approval in the sense that if it meets the requirements that we have in the city for site plans, then it should be approved, where previously with conditional use permits, zoning, and even design review, there's discretion there. For that reason, we do not bring site plan to you until staff believes the proposal meets our requirements. We typically go through 1 or 2 rounds. In this case, it was 1 round of review by our design review team, just to explain the process a little bit after the application was submitted with the site plan and other details that they have. It was reviewed by our design review team, which includes the Public Works Department, our fire marshal, building official, myself, and police department. Had a few comments, not many. Those were provided to the applicant. They made changes, submitted it back to us. We went through another round of review, and that's where we are today. Staff is presenting it to you, and with the indication that or with the statement that it does meet requirements for site plan. What you see on page 17 is the overall location of the property or the site on the W&L campus, and the site plan on the bottom there. We did provide some larger versions in the attachments because it's awfully hard to see at that scale. And over on page 19, I'm going to skip some of the comments that we had for landscape buffering, parking, screening, and whatnot, and just highlight the criteria that you have for site plans 1 through 8. So that I'm now in section 420-2.7B. And the first one, as an example, locations and design of vehicular entrances and exits in relation to streets, giving access to the site in relation to pedestrian traffic. Staff is of the opinion that the proposed site plan for the Lindley Center for Student Wellness building complies with all zoning requirements pertaining to site design and use, and is in compliance with other city codes related to drainage, water supply, fire protection, sanitary sewer facilities, and construction standards. As I mentioned briefly, we do have more of the sheets, certainly not all of the sheets that were provided to us by W&L for this facility. So starting with the layout plan and a landscape plan and some elevations. That's all I have for a presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Arnie?
No, seems rather straightforward. in terms of
Okay.
what we're doing.
Okay. Can we have the applicant statement?
Hugh Latimer, Roanoke, Virginia. On the certificate of appropriateness, I wanted to make one correction on the list of materials. And that is that in the documents, we had talked about a recycled composite roof shingle slates, if you will. And this was
I'm
pulled
sorry,
together.
Hugh, I'm not with you on that, where. just-
Which page are you
I'm
on?
sorry, it's
13.
page 13, titled the description of exterior materials.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And about the 4th one down, it says recycled composite roof slate shingles. And we're changing that to a standard seam metal roof. which will be almost identical to what we have at the new Williams building under construction and other buildings. Turned out the price was about equal, so it's a better item. Beyond what Arnie presented, I don't know really much more what to say about the facility. What's a little bit different is we're taking the parking on East Denny Circle that's near the front of the building. We're taking that away. And that is to maintain better egress for the fire trucks and emergency vehicles. And we will be maintaining or relying on that off-street parking associated with this project on the left side of the building, if you will. And also there'll be ease of access use for the parking garage. It's right down the street. Any other questions?
Well, since you mentioned it, just that parking area is intended for whom? For the people that come to use the center?
I think it'll probably be shared between the people who come to use the center and some staff, perhaps some staff. But I think primarily we want it available for people who come to use the center.
Assuming
Okay. How many spots are there?
I think there are 5. 4, I'm sorry, 4.
But the parking garage is quite close. Is that
Yes,
accurate?
it's about 250 feet away.
It says over here, there are 4 off-street parking
Yep.
spaces. So
Um, and, so I saw that you've got 7 bike racks, bike spaces. But those appear to be up on the second level, is that right? Or is that wrong?
Yes, we have them up on the higher level.
And do you have anything down below? I was just wondering about that because it occurred to me that people who are cycling might actually more likely.
I don't
come
think we
with-
do. We might consider splitting that.
Yeah, that seems like it could be a
Yeah.
good thing, or just adding some more.
Yep.
I don't know how many cyclists you have, but I know, don't you all have a bike share kind of
Yes.
program on campus?
It's
Any other questions for you? All right, I think, thank you. And now we'll open up the floor for public comment. Would anybody in the public like to come up and make a statement? All right, closing public comment. Any commission discussion then?
I think we covered a lot of this when we gave the conditional use approval. So no,
Agreed. You're good?
I'm good.
looks good to me.
All right, then I'll look for a motion or 2 motions and 2 seconds.
As long as the entrance corridor goes first.
I'll look for that first then.
I'm looking for the motion.
I believe it's on page 10.
I move to approve the entrance quarter certificate of appropriateness application EC 2024-03 for the construction of the new Lindley Center for Student Wellness at 200 East Denny Drive as proposed by the applicant.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Okay, and then we need the second one, which is the suggested languages on page 19.
I move to approve site plan number SP 2024-01 and find the submitted site plan for the Lindley Center for Student Wellness Building at 200 East Denny Circle to be in compliance with applicable city codes.
All right, I have a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
And we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And the rest of council will return to the dais.
Can you get by? Okay.
Well, all right then. We got the full crew back up here. Thank you very much, Shannon. We are on to item C, which is conditional use permit 2024-02, an application by John Adamson of Rockbridge Partners LLC to renew a conditional use permit allowing a portion of the building located at 2 South Main Street, tax map number 23-1-194, and owned by Rockbridge Partners LLC to be used as an assembly hall, i.e. public assembly. And we'll start with Arnie and a staff report.
We were somewhat fortunate in just discovering that we had an expiring CUP. If it wasn't for some housekeeping and trying to get rid of files and scanning them in because of our impending move, we hope, that we came across the fact that this one was expiring relatively soon. Contacted the applicant and they were able to get us a staff or an application fairly quickly. But this one has a few wrinkles in it. It's not just a simple renewal. And by that, I mean, one is that we really don't have the private school or the assembly hall use anymore. We made some changes. We actually made a lot of changes in 2016, 2017, which were all fun. And we ended up with uses that are similar, but not exactly the same. One being going from assembly hall to public assembly, then also private school to educational facility, college/university. So if we could update the uses in the revised condition, if there is a revised condition, the applicant is requesting that the first condition, that is for the courtroom and vault to be utilized for private school and assembly purposes, and the determination of which space will be used for this purpose is to be determined by the applicants to remain, and is asking that the second condition, which puts that 15-year renewal period or expiration that requires the renewal, to be not brought forward. And staff, at least since I've been here, have not been recommending that you do conditional use permit approvals with a set date that require their renewals. We have a process in place that if something is not being adhered to, we have enforcement capabilities and we can close out or invalidate that particular conditional use permit. And we've had many go arounds with large capacity houses. They were on a 2-year cycle, a 5-year cycle, and they kept coming back, but they were never, they were always approved regardless. So our recommendation to you is not to, if you're going to renew this, don't do it with a renewal period, because again, it's just simply not necessarily, because we have enforcement procedures available to us in the zoning ordinance. Conditions of issuance are the same conditions of issuance that you always have, and those are listed on page 29 for what it's worth. My recommendations for each of those. Staff does make a recommendation that this be approved, again, without the renewal condition. And unfortunately, the applicant is not able to be here. I should mention that he did check in to see whether if we preferred that we either not have him in attendance or defer it to the next meeting. I thought we'd give it a shot, and if anything comes up, he certainly understands that his absence causes a deferral to the next meeting. He's understanding of that. Happy answering questions.
I have a question about, it's actually just about parking. So if they had events in the courtroom, where would people park? I mean, just on the street, I assume, but is there adequate parking for that kind of activity?
There is no parking requirement for anything in the C1 zoning district, which is downtown proper.
Mm-hmm.
We provide, for the most part, that utility on street and in parking garages and in lots. So there isn't a parking requirement for any of the uses that are occurring in the C1 zoning district.
Mm.
So when, as an example, if there's a public use or a meeting in the vault room or whichever room we're calling it, I walk, people ride their bikes, people park somewhere on the street and make their way to it.
Okay. Thank you.
Arnie, there appears to be a little bit of a difference between the applicant's interpretation of what the conditions are and what the stated conditions are. And on page 34 for the applicant, his understanding seems to be that only the room and or historic deed room be utilized for private assembly purposes. The determination of which space will be used for this purpose is to be determined by the applicants. And I actually like that language better, or something similar to that, because my recollection is one of those spaces has to be used as an assembly space, be available for the public to use as an assembly space. Of course, they have to schedule it through Washington Lee and that. And to me, the condition that was already in there doesn't really reflect that. But I didn't know if you had any insights on that.
No, and thank you for bringing that to my attention earlier today, because I had not really caught on to the fact that in his condition, he sort of said private assembly purposes, and that sort of took assembly hall and private school and just sort of jammed them together. But also, as you just mentioned, the room and the requirement. So we do have, and I'm sorry, I thought we would pass this out, but just for your consideration, a revision that does a couple of different things. If you take that into consideration for condition number one, which again is we're hoping to be the only condition. But so in that, saying that the deed room shall be utilized for public assembly purposes, where John had private assembly, there is really no private assembly. We have public assembly. So making that recommended change. And the determination which space, that second sentence is the same as what is included. And then there'd been the recommendation that the remainder of the building may be used for administrative functions in support of the educational facility, college, university use. Again, the educational facility, college, university use is the updated version of private school.
But the applicant hasn't seen this revision, okay.
And is that building only to be, is it just that it's rented to Washington and Lee? Like, what if they decided to rent it to somebody else?
I don't know what time periods the current lease is, but if WNL decided they didn't need to be there, we'd still have the conditions going forward. So I'm not sure if that's what you're trying to sort of determine. Would this be applicable to somebody else other than WNL? And I think it would, in the sense that it's still the public use of the building for this deed room, vault room, whatever we're calling it.
Right. The public assembly part of it seems pretty straightforward. I'm just looking at this. The remainder of the building may be used for administrative functions in support of the educational facility. So what if it wasn't being rented to an educational facility?
But you still have all of the permitted uses in the C1 zoning
Okay.
district. So all of those are still applicable,
Great.
such as straight office use.
I have a little question, and I think it's maybe to direct this to Leslie. And what you're suggesting is that Rockbridge Partners determines the purpose for that space? See, I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
No, I believe when the building was sold to them and it was required to keep one of the spaces available for public use, which they have
Oh,
done.
Okay.
And the only time it wasn't available was during COVID for a while. But I just want to make sure, and that seems to be what the applicant understands too, based on the way he worded number one. But that's not really what, it wasn't clear to me in the current CUP in that first condition. It didn't state that clearly. So if they're both in agreement, both parties are in agreement that that is the intended use, and we could always go back and look at the record of sale, the deed, to verify that if there is any dispute on that. But if there's no dispute, then I think we should clean up the language a little.
What sort of public use? I'm not familiar.
There's a lot of groups meet in there, and I know Main Street has used that space quite a bit. I could be wrong. I thought.
But you would contact Washington
Exactly.
Lee and ask, say, is there a calendar of
Right.
open
exactly.
times? Okay.
For a while, there was a little issue with insurance requirements. But I don't think that affects our decision here.
Yeah.
I know that groups couldn't, there was an issue about meeting there if they didn't have insurance.
And I,
That was a bit
Right.
unclear.
and I have to admit, that's a pretty standard thing. I know I work at a church and we don't allow groups unless they have
Have
insurance
insurance,
policy.
okay. Yeah, no, but it's not relevant to what
Right.
our issue.
Right.
Okay, any other questions for Arnie?
Well, how would you like to proceed, given that this revision hasn't, I mean, we have two issues. The revision and then the 15 years or not. So how do you want to proceed, given that he hasn't seen this, they haven't seen this?
You
You wanna-
definitely have the ability, if you prefer, to defer this to the next meeting, discuss it if you will, but to defer to your next meeting to get his input so that you're not creating potentially a conflict with something that he's not in favor of. And then I would hope that the second item, which is the time period,
Right.
maybe that's a little bit easier to decide on.
So, right, so, okay, if there's any, I guess we can't anticipate what he would think about this slight change. Right, so I think we probably pretty much have to wait then, don't we? I would say,
We could
right?
continue with the public hearing, but yeah.
Right.
And it may be helpful for me to tell him what your preference is as far as the
Yeah.
language.
Right.
That's what
Okay.
I'm assuming.
Okay, well then, all right, with that in mind, we're not gonna have an applicant statement, right? We have his, what he sent us and what Arnie's told us. So we can ask for public comment at this point, open that up for public comment. And seeing nobody rushing to the floor, we'll close public comment. And so are we, let's say, with the removing of the 15-year renewal period, are we all okay with that, right? Okay.
Yeah.
John,
Yes,
so
I'm
Mesa
okay.
may say no. You okay?
I still would like that to be clarified where it says the determination of which space will be used for this purpose. I don't think that's clear enough, just for the record, but
If I'm not mistaken, by going back through the old conditional use permit file, at that time, there may have been a requirement that some part of the building be used for public space. And they were trying to figure out, was it going to be upstairs in the big courtroom area that has now been taken up with office space? Or is it going to be in the downstairs area? And I'm not sure they had even signed a lease at that point. So they were given the developer flexibility in being able to choose where the private school space would be utilized, because apparently there was also discussion for classroom space potentially going into the courtroom. So they were given a lot of flexibility to decide where the classroom was going to go or where the public assembly or the assembly hall was going to go. And they were given that flexibility to decide which one based on design criteria that hadn't happened yet. Does that help?
So, and at this point, either one could be used? Is it, that's the case that either one would be suitable for?
But it's less likely because the courtroom space is now, I've never been up there, been
Right.
completely utilized for office space. So we're really, for the most part, talking about the vault space. And I think that's also somewhat clear in John's condition number 1, where he's only talking about the courtroom and or historic deed room. No, sorry. He's talking about the courtroom and the historic deed room being used for private assembly purposes. So he is still wanting a little bit of flexibility there.
The vault room is the courtroom, right?
The vault
It's
room
the
is the
records.
room
That's-
downstairs that is,
Okay, so that's a little, there's
Yeah.
3 terms here. So the deed room is also the vault room that we're talking about.
I believe so. yes.
Okay.
and the records room, which is what's showing on this map.
Okay, so there's 3 names for that other room. Okay,
The
the
courtroom is the-
vaulted deed record room. Right,
Yes.
and at this point, so why are they saying even that they can determine which one if they'd have to tear out all the walls of the office space or whatever?
Sometimes I think it's just easier to bring forward the condition,
Yeah.
even if it needs to be amended, but to bring forward the condition that still
Yeah,
allows them the
okay.
flexibility
If they wanted to
you
retro,
change
if,
tenants or if
Right,
something were to
okay.
happen.
okay. So basically, so then you go to say, we're gonna use this, they say you're gonna go into that room and. Okay, so are we still good with this revised language? Leslie,
Yeah, and I'll just throw out one more thing that the owner may want to consider. I mean, it does look like the original CUP gave them the option to use it as classroom space or assembly. I don't think it's ever been used as classroom, but that would be the applicant's decision if he feels like that needs to be carried forward. That was not in his application letter. I just throw it out to you.
Wait, so it doesn't have to be used for public assembly? It can be used for classroom space instead? Is that what you're?
That's
Is
that's what the original condition says. I don't,
Yeah.
my,
Yeah,
and I checked
see
with a
that.
couple other people, the in city council, and the understanding always was that something had to be used, and that seems to be that, and that's something has to be used for public space, and that is included in Mr. Adamson's letter. So I think he's under the same impression, but it seems like that original condition was maybe poorly worded.
Right.
So it would be nice to clean it up and make it reflect what we really intend.
Yes.
So we're in a sense, we're making, this is not a whole new CUP, but are we tweaking it enough, not so much that it is a whole new CUP, right? We're essentially keeping the substance of it the same, but cleaning up the language to reflect the change in zoning terminology, right?
And
Okay,
it will then go forward in perpetuity.
okay,
Yes.
okay. So would we be good telling him that this is what we're interested in, this new revised wording of it? And
Yeah, I just have one question going back to what Shannon asked, now that I look at the new version. And so if in the future it's sold, could it, is this too restrictive that it says educational college use? You mentioned that it could go to any use allowed in a C1.
Permitted use, yes.
Okay,
And it just says may be used as administrative. It doesn't have to be used as administrative.
okay, maybe.
Right.
Thank you,
Yeah.
John. Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
okay, so we'll tell him that, and then we'll just carry this over, and it'll be presumably if he's like, okay, that's great, we'll just quickly finish it up next time.
Is it fair to say that you are generally in support of the proposed revision?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
We'll provide that to him. He can listen to the tape of your discussion, and then we'll have him
Yes.
back at the next meeting.
Yes.
We should still need a motion to defer, though.
Yes. Okay. We need a motion to defer.
I move that we defer this until the next meeting.
Second.
All right. All in favor of that?
I,
Aye. All opposed? Okay, so we'll defer that, carry that over, and we'll be. All right, now we will move on to our fourth item of new business. Zoning ordinance amendments 2024-01 is in our annual zoning ordinance amendments, our so-called batch A. I think there's 16, right, in there, and we've talked about these a lot, and Arnie will give us a report.
It appears that there is not a terrible amount of interest in this from the public, so I'm not going to go through each of these individually. You have had a good bit of time to go through them and make amendments, slight amendments here and there to make it better. So therefore, I'll just open it up for questions if you have any questions of me.
The only question I had was, in last meeting, we left the concessions and the food trucks. We said that we didn't need the concessions after all. And the food trucks, we talked about maybe having a permit. So we're not including that. It wasn't in this batch.
That concessions ended up in batch B.
Okay, and
That's one of the separate items.
yeah, and is that where food trucks in
I think
a
so.
Yeah.
roundup two?
Yeah, I believe
Okay,
so.
that
Yeah.
was the only one
Right.
those,
These are only the batch A items that were
Right.
advertised. So we still have a couple of small batch B and one larger batch B.
Okay.
Okay, and any other questions for Arnie?
oh, that was in the minutes we were talking about food trucks.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can open up for public comment now, and if anybody wants to ask questions that might require further description of one of these, we can do that. So open up public comment period, and looking like we have none. We'll close public comment and see what you all think, what kind of discussion and
One overall question for Arnie and for us is, are we voting on these as a batch or as individuals?
You have the option of taking it either way. It doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of discussion or questions, so perhaps it's easier just to do it as one.
I have one tiny little question. Okay, I guess, I don't know if I was here when this was being discussed, but back to chickens.
yeah. Uh-huh.
This is saying that C1, C2 can have chickens. So,
Yes,
how is
Yeah.
that possible?
it's what it's saying is that chickens are an accessory use to any residential use. So if you are in a residence, then you have the ability to have chickens as long as you meet the 3 pages of use and design standards. The issue that we have is, and that's why there's a little note on the matrix there. We do have single family detached houses in the C1 zoning district. I'm going to give you an example along Walker Street. So if you turn off of East Nelson up Walker Street, there are 2 or 3 houses on the right-hand side as you're heading up the hill in the C1 zoning district.
Okay.
Look completely like a detached single-family home. And we didn't want to prohibit those folks that just happen to be in a C1 zoning district from having chickens if they wanted them.
Okay. Thank you.
And I have a question about the bed and breakfasts one. This is item 8 on page
Four-
50,
14, yeah, page
49.
page
and
49 of the main packet.
Yeah.
Yep, upper right.
So, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, so because it's just an adjacent parcel, the adjacency can be the back lot line. Is that correct? So I'm just thinking, for example, between Jefferson and Jackson Street, there's some very long lots. Right, so you could have you could live in a house on Jefferson Street and own the property on Jackson behind you. You really wouldn't, you could have quite a bit of distance between you and the bed and breakfast. And might not really have a good sense of what's going on there. And I mean, I think that we're trying to give some flexibility to property owners and the people who are owning the bed and breakfast, but I also think we're trying to protect the folks who live on, in the immediate right next door and across the street from a bed and breakfast. So I just wanted to bring that up and see if anybody else had sort of thoughts about that. I wonder whether we want to have like I don't know, in addition to adjacency, maybe there is, a distance which seems, very arbitrary. So perhaps it's, you have to be on the same street and adjacent.
What about the fact that aren't bed and breakfasts right now limited to Maine, Nelson, and Washington? Those are the only 3 streets, correct?
Correct.
So maybe it wouldn't matter.
But I can't immediately say that we don't have the same sort of distance requirement that you're mentioning between Jefferson and Jackson, that wouldn't perhaps also occur somewhere along 3 streets that were just mentioned. But it is true, we only allow it by conditional use permit along 3 of our more major streets.
Does say here with at least 50 feet of adjacency to the parcel.
Right,
does say
but
that
that
there.
could be the back.
That means the property line
Oh,
has to
Right,
connect.
And
that's this.
Okay.
2 residences could be
350.
fairly well separated if the
Gotcha.
lots are large enough, I guess is the point.
Mhm. So if this is Jackson and this is Jefferson, there's your lot line.
The 2 or 3 examples that we have, folks that were interested, they were not, they were close.
Yeah.
I mean, they were, but that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a situation
Right.
somewhere else where there is a little bit more distance. I guess it's up to you to determine whether or not in any property in Lexington, if you're not immediately next door, because we have relatively small parcels overall, that they wouldn't automatically be close enough, the residences, as long as they have some sort of adjacency of at least 50 feet.
I think the main issue too was that they were close enough that the neighbor, and they have to be there. We made that clear that they have to be there while they have guests, is that the neighbors could knock on their door and say, tell them to cut it out. And so I think even if they do have a deep parcel, I think you have that.
If the neighbors know who owns the property.
Doesn't everybody in Lexington? Owns a property.
Well, maybe so.
Yeah.
Almost.
And who owned it before you and before that?
If I remember, Arnie, you wanted to add with at least 50 feet of adjacency. To, in a way, to, if someone was buying a parcel where they were just, the corners were touching. You're trying to say they're more adjacent. And in a way, that's a bit, could be able to, I'm happy with it now, but I could, I think in simplicity is may live on an immediately adjacent parcel. Again, the 50 feet is trying to do something that's a bit not theoretical, but we're trying to anticipate something.
I agree with that. I had the same exact thought when I read it through. Do you see a real value on the 50 feet?
I was just thinking of, as an example, if you have two that are just touching at the very corner, then it's possible that you can't cross from one to the other.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking in that 50
Right.
feet was slightly
Yeah.
arbitrary. I'll admit that. But just thinking at least some adjacencies so that you could travel across one parcel without maybe having to go out. And when you have to go check on your bed and breakfast, that you don't have to go out on the street or something. This, again, it's not going to be a tremendous walkabout to get there in this town, but that was the thinking, was just if you have at least some adjacency, you are able to travel across.
I could go either way, and I don't want to.
I mean, I might not know the layout of all the streets well enough. I don't know if that's an area, unless you can think of actual properties where we have that on those streets. Where you have it that being that long. I don't.
What's the minimum frontage required in R1? Is it,
60.
so you could be in trouble if you had a little bit of a pie shaped parcel. So those houses the B&Bs tend to be pretty big.
R1 minimum lot width is 60 feet for a single family and 80 feet for a two-family dwelling.
I mean, I just don't think we're going to have this situation where the other structure is that far away from the B&B. I just don't see that happening.
Right.
So I personally don't see a need to put anything in there or adjust that. And the 50 feet is kind of arbitrary, but we want to make sure that they're actually contiguous, that it's one of these things where it looks like one property, which is basically what we want, is it? If you looked from the street, you'd say, yeah, that's one property. It's got two things, and it's not like there's a wall between it or a hedge or something, that they're both there.
So then do we need to say that it's both immediately adjacent and accessible?
Yeah.
I mean, because you said the 50 feet because you wanted to make sure that people didn't have to, or could go through their own property to get to the B&B.
If you have adjacency, you have ownership. So therefore you have the ability to make the accessibility without us maybe forcing it.
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the owner is going to be, I don't know. I can't imagine the situation where the owner would be that cut off by something that they weren't. I mean,
does it suffice to have it just with an immediately adjacent parcel?
Yeah.
About that?
Is
that
this a
work?
condition? I think it does. And is this a conditional, bed and breakfast is a conditional use anyway? So
So,
you
Yeah.
can
yes.
make sure that it has some accessibility.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, I'm a little worried that the 50 feet could be too much, that maybe.
Yeah.
But then picking a number, any other number becomes arbitrary too, so I sort of think strike it as.
Say
well.
immediately adjacent.
Yeah.
Is that what
Is
you
a
said?
corner touching actually considered adjacent?
I wouldn't, because if you have a point, and that's a point, and so I wouldn't consider that adjacent. That's why I was trying to come up with something that would be at least a minimum requirement. But you do have the ability through the conditional use permit to review this, even if you took out 50 feet.
Yeah.
And then you could, on a case by case basis, as they come before you, make the determination if in a particular case, and I cannot think of one, if they're just corner to corner. In that particular instance, is that sufficient? It may be, but again, we don't know that until it comes up through the conditional use permit process.
Mhm.
But if we have a set number, we can't change that in a conditional use. So yeah, I think it'd be better to take it out and then we can
Yeah.
address it if it's an issue.
Are we assuming, I mean, should we say that the adjacent lot has to be on the same street? Like you were concerned that the one lot was on one street and one was the other, but you couldn't have the owner's dwelling on the other street because that's part of the bed and breakfast establishment. You can't have it on those other
Well,
streets.
except that I actually am fine with it being on a separate street. Like I could
Yeah.
see, Carlos used to own one on the corner. And so you could have you could be on Main Street, but have on Houston Street, have an adjacent parcel. I can't remember what corner you were on, but, so I do see there's places that actually that's not a problem.
It's adjacent.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But I would say you could also be across an alley and not be adjacent and still be just right there.
That's true.
I'm guessing most of those alleys are private and they own them anyway, but I don't know. Maybe we come to that when
Yeah.
address it if we come to that.
Well, let's say the corner of, what is it? Sorry, give me a street that allows them again? Main Street. Okay, so let's say the corner of Main and Preston. You could live in an apartment on the corner of Main and Preston and own a B&B across the street, for example. You'd know what was going on across the street.
But we want the owners to essentially be on essentially the same property. I mean,
Yeah.
like the de facto same property, right? So
I don't have the answer to the street issue, but we do have one, and I'm on Stonegate on South Main. If you turn the corner on Sellers, they had the separate detached unit with garage underneath, and they are living in the top. That's on a separate street. The Stonegate faces South Main and has a conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast. And we, through that process, realized, and that's what's actually the impetus for changing this. And it's it has a separate address onto the Cellar Street side.
Right.
There's not an alleyway in between it, but it does present that case where they're not on the same street.
But they do, I think, have an alley. I could be wrong, next
Yeah.
to it.
That's right.
So you could end up with the catty corner parcel if we allowed the alley to count, which I don't know. I would say no. I would like to stick with the adjacency. It's almost as though it's one parcel.
I would just, being devil's advocate, I would just say that I'm going to guess that the person in the house next door across the alley is going to know a lot more than somebody way back on a parallel street. That's,
I would also maybe offer that I'm not sure when we're ever going to have one where it's
Yeah.
across the alley, and they do have the ability, if that presents itself, to come in and do another amendment to the text before getting conditional use permit.
Yeah.
And just sort of fly it up that flagpole to see if it's acceptable.
So would we like to take out with at least 50 feet of adjacency to the parcel containing? Do we want to get rid of that 50
I
feet
think so.
and just the owners may live on an immediately adjacent parcel, period?
Yes.
It's simpler. clearer.
You'd like to go ahead and make a motion if you're done with the discussion and you're done with the public input portion of it, just to take that one separately since it was amended.
Yeah, somebody, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, I do have one more question. Number 5.
No, well, this is just for
We're
number
gonna
8.
do this one separate.
This
So we're
is
doing this
motion
one
just-
separate.
yeah,
Okay,
that's
you
right,
mean
yeah.
like right this moment. Okay.
Okay, since I offered to move the period. I suggested we move the period. I move that we amend the suggested language for bed and breakfast requirement to live on the property to read whenever there are guests on the property, the owner of the bed and breakfast establishment must reside on the property, or alternatively, the owners may live on an immediately adjacent parcel.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, Shannon, you said number 5?
Yeah, number 5, page 43 of the whole packet. So it says there shall be no outdoor storage of home occupation related items. I was just wondering whether that includes like a car. Is a car like a vehicle that's being used for the business?
No, we're okay with if you have a business and you have a really nice sticker on the side of your car that advertises your business, not a problem. We had talked previously about larger vehicles and decided not to do anything about those either. So no, the parking of vehicles would not be part of this. What we're trying to parse out is the difference between storage of your grill for your home use versus your plumbing supplies for your plumbing
Yeah,
home
sure.
occupation and operations. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, no, I understand. I just was wondering about, parking like a big, whatever it is. So if somebody owned a duck boat, for example. I'm kidding.
Is there
Duck
one in
business?
Lexington?
No, I can't imagine that there's one in Lexington. That's it. That's all I got.
Any other questions? Would someone like to make a motion to accept numbers 1 through 7 and 9 through 16, I guess?
I move that we accept the numbers, the zoning ordinance amendments number 1 through 7 and 9 through, sorry, what was it? 9 through
16.
16 as or as presented.
I second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
I
All opposed? Unanimous, all right. Yeah, oof,
Hey.
all right. Yes, indeed. All right, moving on to other business. Any sort of zoning and planning report perchance?
Quick zoning report. A notice of violation was sent to a short-term rental that was not abiding by the zoning restrictions. And without appealing, they decided to go ahead and shut down that operation. And that's the first one that we've had on the short-term rental side. Also involved in a significant cleanup of a yard over on Carruthers Street with a number of other staff departments for the city. That was not a zoning violation, but rather a nuisance. So we attacked it from another section of code, city code. Also drafted today, notice of violation for an RV parked in the front yard along Confederate Circle, and we'll be delivering that on Monday. Project management team met for the, and thank you for accepting, for the citywide housing conditions survey. I'm not sure if I've mentioned before to you, but the city was awarded a grant, a CDBG planning grant to do a housing conditions survey citywide, where we'll hire a consultant. We're working on the RFP now. They'll come in a 2 or 3 day period, look at all the houses, and they're practiced in doing this. They know what they're looking at, and they'll give it sort of a rating of 1 to 5, I think is fairly typical. And that will give us not a parcel level data, because we don't want everybody to know I got a 5 and you got a 1 kind of thing, but we'll have some extra data. This is all being paid for at the state level. So once we have the consultant come in, we'll have extra data on housing conditions that will supplement what's going on with the region-wide housing study. So once we have those two, we'll have a better sense of perhaps where we might need to put some rehab money if we can find some rehab money for some of these houses. And we reached out and we have a planning commissioner who's been invited to be part of that project management team, and Shannon gladly accepted. Thank you for that.
Welcome.
Also forgot to mention, and haven't mentioned in a while, the map amendment that is for the opportunity area along South Main Street that included a few houses along Maple Lane. We're still working on that. I've actually gotten the map amendment done, so I have it in proper form. I need to advertise that. And then heard back from the attorney today about subdivision ordinance, about boundary line adjustments, where we renew a subdivision ordinance amendment. We have to do a little bit more work about boundary line adjustments and lot line vacations, and hopefully making those administrative. So we don't need to bring something as simple as a boundary line adjustment to you. As long as it meets all the code standards for size and frontage, it really doesn't need to come here, in my opinion, and it really doesn't need to go to council for something as simple as a vacation of a boundary line or an adjustment of boundary line. So we're still working on that. That's all I have for zoning report.
Okay. Anything need to be said on the annual PC milestones, ongoing remaining items? Is it just kind of, we've got we know where we're going. We've already talked about what's coming up. Okay.
Oh, Just
Yeah.
actually, Chair, just, and also with Arnie, since we've been so efficient tonight at 6 o'clock, we can spend a few more minutes maybe on this. So, cottage housing is up next, right? That's what we agreed the last time. I'm trying to remember what we went through the last time.
We're still gonna do concessions and whatever that was that I'm not recalling for,
Food
trucks.
trucks.
and
Mhm.
so there are a couple of batch B items. Tackle those quickly and then get to the larger item, which will take a while, which is the cottage housing.
Okay, and then we had the entrance corridor for South Flex. You were gonna give us
Update.
an update, kind of what we did with WNL a long time ago before we get,
I cannot recall where that fit in, if that was fitting,
Yep.
slotting in before we were gonna start on cottage housing, or I just don't recall. I know I've got that in my notes, but I don't
think it
recall
was
that off the top of
after.
my head.
well, if we could just add it in the list, Arnie.
Oh,
So-
here, yeah.
Yeah, instead of what else, if any, if we could just add it as B. I just don't want us to lose sight of it, that's all.
And is that also where the concessions discussion goes?
No,
That's a batch B.
That's
that's
batch B.
batch B. So we have cottage housing batch B, and then the kind of the over briefing for us on entrance corridor requirements for South Lexington. And we said that isn't immediate, but it doesn't, we don't want to push it too far into the future. So,
And are we doing batch B next or cottage? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Actually, technically, they're all in batch B, but we're doing smaller batch B
Yeah.
Yeah,
before we
and
get the bigger batch B.
That's true.
okay,
Okay,
thank you.
great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Arnie. Brings us to item 7, which is the city council report.
We met last Thursday and we had two land use issues. One was whether we wanted to participate in the airport feasibility study, and with a split vote, we decided that we would participate in that, and it's more of a financial participation. And then we had a request by Echelon Resources for just the Spotswood property to have for a tax abatement on that. The financials are not working out since they started the project. The cost of building materials and the interest rates have gone up, and they're not sure they can do the project at this point. They're looking at getting financing through Virginia Housing, and Virginia Housing will give them a lower interest rate. One of their requirements is that they have a affordability component to it. So they would use they're going for the option of making 20% of the houses basically workforce housing. The people have to make 80%, no more than 80% of the adjusted average mean income to qualify. And so they've asked for a 50% tax abatement for 15 years to make the numbers work. So at this point, we put a hold on it, just deferred till we could get more information from them. And today, David Sigler and I and Jim Hallis and Jen Bell met with several people from Echelon to start the initial discussion, and we'll have several just to get more information so we can make a informed decision. So hopefully we should discuss it more at our meeting next Thursday. Oh, and then the other big news, which you probably saw in the paper, is we hired a city manager. Yeah, so very excited to have him, and he will start sometime between mid-May and 1st of June.
And when does Jim leaves the end of March?
End of April. Yes, and he's been very generous to extend his time for that. So we're very glad that he's going to stay in the community and that he's helped us out so much during
And
this
we should
transition.
thank all the counselors, two in the room and the others, because it was an extensive search process and took a lot of your time. So thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks. Good.
That's
right.
all I have.
Thanks, Leslie. And with that having been said, we can sit here in amiable silence for the rest of the evening.
Or
Or-
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Aye to yourself. Meeting adjourned at 6:04 PM.
Thank y'all.
Yes.
Thank you, Arnie, for the good work on batch A.
28.
Thank you.
Oh, I think our son went to a pre-K.
Oh, yeah?
Good to see you.
I know this guy.
I know this guy. How are you?
Well,
Or maybe you're gonna tell me otherwise.
that he will, well, acknowledge that he knows me.
I do know you. I'm proud to say it.
So,
Yeah.
that's
Off the
where-
top of my head, I can go back.
Yeah.
And
It's
But yeah,
a big
when I
call
was
for the
here at
city.
the
Yeah.
table, I sat here.
You